I am
Hi
here.
there. My name is Kat, and I'm the MCAT expert at Magoosh. Magoosh is an online test prep company, and our mission is to make test prep accessible, effective, and enjoyable.
I like the accessible part,
Yeah.
which is why I started following you guys because I come from a underprivileged background, so I just remember applying and doing the MCAT and trying to figure out how to afford it all.
Right.
And I definitely got a free set of MCAT test prep material, and that's, I mean, all the ways that I've been supported on this journey has been because of companies like yours, looking out for students that don't have the financial support to go on this journey, which costs a lot of money.
Yeah,
So
right.
I really admire that. Um,
Great.
I'm Adrian. I'm in my fifth year of an MD PhD program at University of Maryland. Um, I have three kids. I've been married for 12 years. I served in the Army for 10 years. I could keep
Yeah.
listing things.
Yeah, you've got an amazing background. I want to start with maybe just hearing a little bit about your background before the Army. So thinking, going back to high school, sort of what were your interests back then? What was your background, or what was your background even just more generally than high school?
I've wanted to be a doctor for as long as I can remember. I remember reading about it when I was little and aspiring to be a physician. So it's always been a goal of mine. So anyone that's known me since high school would say Adrian has always wanted to be a doctor. But I grew up in inner city Baltimore with a single parent, and my mom did the best that she could to take care of my brother and I. But as far as navigating applying to college and things like that, she just wasn't um, able to help facilitate that. So I ended up during the Army at 17 to be able to afford college and um, get to the place I'm at now. I just ended up staying for 10 years, which was not the original plan.
How did the Army help shape your interests further? So you said you've always wanted to be a doctor. What
I
then?
did nothing medical in the Army. I was military intelligence. I really think that the Army helped me figure out how to be the person that I am. So I was really quiet and meek and introverted when I was younger. And you can't be a leader of in a male dominated field being quiet. So I just learned how to use my voice. I learned how to speak up. I learned how to be in a professional environment. It also taught me how to be a leader and advocate for others. And it also taught me how to be responsible and how to plan and be detail oriented. So while I didn't specifically gain medical knowledge, I definitely gained skills that are still serving me today.
Can you share with everyone what your bachelor's was in?
Yeah, so I went to Augusta University. I double majored in cell and molecular biology and chemistry. I originally took this time as a stepping stone to medical school because I knew that the bachelor's degree wasn't the end goal. But I did all those things that you do as a pre-med student to check the boxes to apply to medical school. I did the shadowing, I did the volunteering, I did the research, and I just happened to fall in love with science and research in the process. That wasn't the plan. So
Yeah.
just before I applied to medical school, I decided to add the PhD portion and I applied as an MD PhD student. I feel like it uses two different parts of my brain. Like medicine takes some very methodical, but quick taking in a
Yeah.
bunch of information and making a decision and acting on it.
Right.
Um, but science takes a lot more critical thinking. You have to see the problem and come up with how to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it takes two different thought processes, or at
Mm.
least that's how I feel.
Did you have mentors as an undergrad?
So, if anyone that follows me knows that I'm a huge advocate for mentorship, it was my favorite thing to do when I was in the Army. I loved taking my soldiers and helping them realize their own goals. We had to do monthly counselings in the Army, so you had to sit down with your soldier and say, "You've done these great things, you've done these not so great things, and let's set some long term goals for the future." And that's something that I've carried with me throughout my undergraduate and now my graduate career. So I would not be able to be at this point without mentorship because I entered the world of medicine with no network and no foundation. So I 100% relied on my professors in undergrad. I literally just called my research professor this morning because I was like, I'm ready to stop doing science. And she's like, no, you're not going to stop doing science. I really honestly believe that you shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. There are people out there that are doing what you want to do, or at least are doing a part of what you want to do. So you
Right.
should be able to reach out to those people, ask for help,
Mm-hmm.
and put it together to form what you want to do. When I first started, said I wanted to be a surgeon scientist, and it was, oh, I don't know that, I've never heard of that, but I've been able to find those people, and it's not as crazy as it sounds, but you
Yeah.
just have to look for that mentorship. Mentors aren't going to come to you, you have to find them. But I definitely had mentors every step of the way. I
Mm-hmm.
still do.
I want to hear a little bit about, you talked about how funding and support, financial support has
Mhm.
been so instrumental. Can you say a little bit about what scholarships or other opportunities you came across?
I absolutely can because I would not be here without it. I went from, my husband and I went from a dual income family with insurance to no income and
Mhm.
being on Medicaid.
Oh,
So we have definitely been at both ends of the spectrum. It was a difficult choice to separate, and mainly because of that financial security that I was able to provide for my family. And we both, my husband and I, separated within a year of each other, and both of us went back to school. So when
mm.
you have three kids under four that
Oh,
like to eat food, it's really important that you're still able to provide shelter, clothing, and food for them. So the first thing I did when I separated was start to look for scholarships,
hmm,
um, because I knew that I was going to have that difficulty and that guilt of, do I buy this test prep material or do I get the kids new shoes? Like, and those were real life choices that I was having to make. So, in 2014, I was selected as a Tillman Scholar. The Pat Tillman Foundation was founded after the death of Pat Tillman, who was a football player. He played for the Arizona Cardinals, and he was killed by fratricide. And his family started a foundation to empower veterans and military spouses, um, to further their goals in education, but to also make an impact on society. So every year they select 60 scholars, and I was fortunate enough to
mm,
be selected in 2014. And that honestly had two big impacts on me. First, it allowed me to focus on my education and not have to be concerned about feeding my kids. And then the second arm is that it introduced me to a huge network of medical professionals because
mm,
there's Tillman scholars in all different domains, and
mhm,
a huge group of them are in medicine. So
mm.
I was able to talk to them about the application process, navigating
Oh,
what schools I should apply to. They are the reason why I'm at Maryland. I would not have
mm,
applied to
mm,
Maryland
mm,
without them encouraging me to apply there. I would never have shot for that school without
mhm,
them. So I was incredibly fortunate to be selected. I've won lots of other smaller scholarships throughout. I also did the fee assistance program to help me apply to medical school because,
right,
again, I was raising three children and we qualified for Medicaid, so I was not making money.
mhm,
So I was able to show the AAMC that I needed that financial assistance. So I was able to apply to 15 schools through the fee assistance program. And that's another reason why I'm in medical school.
mhm.
I say it all the time. You cannot do this alone, especially when you're a non-traditional student. You cannot get through this by yourself. Find your people and find the scholarships. They're out there.
Right. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of the fee assistance
Mhm.
program, for those of you who don't know, Magoosh now has a benefit for those of you who
I
apply,
shared
who,
it.
yeah, yeah. For if you qualify for FAP, then you are eligible for a free account. So
That's amazing.
you can sign up for that trial account or free account if you are an FIP student on
Mhm.
the link in my bio. So
That's
quick
amazing.
interjection.
That's a game changer because I think when I did the fee assistance program, they gave you one test prep book, but it's very thin and there's not a lot of information in it. And I took the new MCAT the year it came out, so there really
Oh,
wasn't a lot of information out there about it to begin
oh,
with.
right.
So that's amazing that you all recognize the need of students that qualify
Mhm.
for the fee assistance program.
So you succeeded in the face of many societal obstacles and many
Mhm,
different levels.
mhm,
I'm wondering, since you have started the MD PhD program, what have either been the biggest obstacles you've faced related
mhm.
to your identity or background, or just the most surprising ones?
I didn't expect to be the representation for so many people.
Oh,
Um, in my med school class, I go to a public medical school that's situated in downtown Baltimore. I was the only person in my class of 160 that grew up in Baltimore City and went to
mm,
Baltimore City public schools.
mm,
Um, that's strange, right? I mean, if you're
right.
a public medical school, the only public medical school in the state, you would think there would be more representation of the people that you serve. And not to say that my school is not integrated in the community, because that's one of the reasons why I chose my school is because of the outreach and how involved they are in West Baltimore.
Right.
But I've taken that as a challenge to reach back
Mm,
and help other students get to where I am. So I do a lot of mentoring for middle and high school students, and even like through Instagram, and I get DMs every day about people asking me how I do various things. But I've taken that on as a personal charge to not just be the success for myself, but help others get to where I am.
so someone is asking, how do you exactly balance those two sides of your brain that you mentioned? So you talked about the straightforward,
Mhm.
methodical, slow-moving, critical thinking science in the classroom
Right.
with the there. Let's see, it was worded just a little bit different here. I mean, the way you had said it was that
Mhm.
there's a big difference between the scientific thinking that you do in your
Mhm.
doctoral program versus the medical thinking
It
that you
definitely
do
is.
in med school. So
Mhm.
so I'll just kind of, I'm maybe garbling it a little bit from the
I
person
can
who wrote
explain.
in, but
So that's why I'm in an MD PhD program, is because I can't negate one over the other. I need to be able to do both and then also bridge them together. My school does a great job with its MD PhD program because while you're in medical school, you do grad school activities such as we have a journal club that we go to every other week and we read scientific papers. We learn how to read papers and interpret figures. Then while we're in grad school, I do clinical case studies and we
mm,
present patients and we have to do 100 clinical hours before we can go back to medical school. So it's a really integrated program. You're not divorcing the MD from the PhD. And at my school, I've interviewed at other places where they were completely separate.
mhm,
Um, and it's just I'm not doing medicine right now, so I'm able to get my fill of all the science geeking out that I could possibly want until I am sick of it and am crying to go back to take care of patients.
mhm.
That's
Yeah, right.
by the time I reached my second year of medical school and I was ready to take my first board exam, I was mentally exhausted
Uh-huh.
from just the rote memorization and just trying to cram everything into my brain that I was ready to take that brain break. But I don't think that I'll ever completely be happy with one or the other because I need to do both, which is why I'm learning how to do both.
How did you manage having children, being present, and also being competitive?
Okay, so I first of all, I'm crazy. Let's just get that out there all the way. I operate on a lot less hours of sleep than the average person.
Mhm.
Um, I'm very intentional about my time.
Mm,
If I am at school, I am studying and I
mm,
am focused on that's what I'm doing. When
right.
I'm home with my children, and I tell myself I spend a quality of time with them rather than a quantity of time with
Mhm,
them. There's a
mhm,
difference between being at home and you're all in the same house for several hours and no one's interacting with each other. But I made sure when I came home I would be gone because I treated school like work. So I would be gone the whole day. I would come home in the evening, but I made sure that I talked to them, played with them. I have pictures of me. I bought a coloring book for anatomy in medical school, so I
Oh,
would sit and color in my anatomy coloring book, and they would color in their coloring books. Like I would just make sure that I was doing what they wanted to do. I've
uh-huh.
definitely made those hard choices where I really need to study for something,
Mm,
but the kids, they sense when it's exam time, so they get really clingy. I've definitely walked away from study material to spend time with my children, but I've also made the reverse situation where, okay, my exam's tomorrow. I
mm-hmm.
can't. But I would tell them, they knew when my exam schedules were, so I would tell them my exam is on this day. Mommy will hang out with you on this day.
Yeah.
So I was very upfront with them. The hard part, honestly, is my husband.
Mm, interesting.
The kids are way more flexible because they're satisfied sometimes with a hug
Oh,
and a conversation. The
uh-huh.
harder part is maintaining a marriage
Oh, wow. That's really
while you're doing this. That's the harder
right.
part.
So I'm thinking about the people, especially who follow my Instagram and other live events I've done, mostly people who are studying for the MCAT or soon will be.
Mhm.
And do you have any tips on how to communicate that to people in your life? How to communicate being so busy?
So I was lucky that when I took the MCAT, I was in Georgia and my family lives in Maryland, so they were not looking for me. But then I got into medical school in Maryland, so they don't really understand why I'm not hanging out and coming to parties and things like that. Um, it's hard to I tell my classmates in medical school would always say, I don't understand how you're doing. I can barely take care of myself and you're taking care of a whole family. And I say, like, you have responsibilities to someone else. You're not an island. So
Mm,
you're someone's daughter, son, friend,
mm, mm,
whatever that you still have responsibilities to. Mine just depend on me for food.
mhm,
So
mm.
outside of that circle of my immediate family, sometimes you have to make those social sacrifices, but I think this journey is nothing but sacrifices.
Mm,
I go to large things, weddings and things like that. I support my church, so I'm in church every
mhm,
Sunday. But
mhm.
other than that, I really don't do a whole lot of like random parties or things like that.
Right.
They have to understand that this is bigger than when I say I have to go to the lab in the middle of the night, I'm literally going to the lab in the middle of the night.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's
Right.
a sacrifice that I have to make.
Yeah. So it's about your own priorities and just
The
being
PhD is not going to earn itself. I
right.
mean,
Right.
is what I tell them.
That's right. Are there activities or things you did as an undergrad? Oh, that prepared you specifically. Well, I remember you mentioned research, but the question is that prepared you for the PhD program of your training.
So I did 2 years of undergraduate research. I did a long-term project with the person that I called this morning.
Mhm.
And I was fortunate enough that that project was just, they let me do it on my own. I proved to be responsible enough. I mean, because I wasn't a 19-year-old. I was in my late 20s at that point, and I'd shown that I'd been responsible. So I was literally given a key to a lab space, and I was able to make that project my own. So that really prepared me for where I am now, where there's no one holding my hand and telling me, you need to be at the lab at this time and run this experiment. It's really self-driven.
Right.
And if I don't think and forecast in the future what I need to do, it's really easy for a PhD to take a long time if you're
Mhm.
not self motivated. So, definitely working on that project on my own. And I did a lot of, because I was a biology and a chemistry major, so I did some chemistry projects. So, that taught me um, how to work a GCMS. I learned how to use some tools ahead of time
Mm,
that I'm able to understand and read papers better now than if I had not done that in undergrad.
sure.
So, I mean, just little things. I did stuff, more things to prepare for medical school than for the PhD portion, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Right. How long did you study for the MCAT, and any tips for keeping a schedule when you study for it? with a while
Okay.
balancing life, it says.
So first, I wish I had studied more
Okay.
because, well, I mean, there was really nothing to study because
It
I
was the
took it
first
the
year?
first I took it the first year it came out, and I hadn't had biochem yet. So
Oh,
everything, my school hadn't adjusted its biology like track to meet the idea of taking biochem before the MCAT because it wasn't on the
mm-hmm.
MCAT, and then it was on the MCAT. So I had to study amino acids and didn't
Right.
really quite understand exactly what was. I mean, I get it now, but at the time I hadn't had biochem yet. I studied for about 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
but I was still in school, so I took it my summer between junior and senior year. Um, but I've been in school nonstop since 2013. So even in the summer, I was taking summer classes. So I never stopped with coursework.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of students are able to take a gap year, take time off. And I even financially would not have been able to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to stay in school full time because that's what the GI Bill requires, but then
Mm-hmm.
also find time to study. So I would just say be intentional with your studying time. If you're going to study for a block of time, say 2, 3 hours, that's what you need to be doing for those hours, not study for 10 minutes and pick up your phone or have a show. And no, you need to be focused on what you're doing in that block of time. And then take practice exams. I
Mm-hmm.
wish I had taken more, but there weren't any available when I took the MCAT. But I'm sure there's tons now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and don't neglect the cars section. A lot of students think that I'm just gonna go and wing it, and it's in there for a reason. And I think that a lot of students neglect it, and they shouldn't.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, great tips. Were
Yeah.
you involved in a lot of research prior to your program?
Hmm.
I think you've sort of answered that.
Hmm.
Would it be a setback if you don't have much research experience and you're applying to such a program?
If you're applying MD, PhD, you need research experience. You will not get accepted without research experience because the same way you have to prove to medical schools that you're invested in going to medical school and being a physician by doing the shadowing and getting the clinical hours and things like that, you have to do the same thing for research. And doing a small project is not sufficient to prove that you will stick because it's a long time.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm,
on average an 8-year program. So you have to make sure that you're clear. I am dedicated to getting this PhD. I really want to do research in the future.
mm-hmm.
And I need to learn these skills in order to be what I envision my career to be. So it's the longer the better. And the more honest you are about your role in that research project, the better. So don't overinflate. If you were just responsible for cell cultures, don't say that you designed a mutant and did all these other things and you did ELISAs. If you did not do that, that's fine. But as long
Yeah.
as you understand your role in the project and what the project is overall, and you can communicate that, that's fine. Just
Mm-hmm,
longitudinal project over
mm-hmm.
a long period of time, and you have to show them that you're invested in doing research.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great advice. That's right. Yeah, they're not expecting anything amazing necessarily
Right.
from people
And
coming
they're
out of
not that you shouldn't have to be curing cancer,
right.
but you need to show that I've stuck with this project. I've learned things. This is why I'm invested in doing science. I really enjoy it. I want to know the answers to these questions. One of the questions I got asked in my interview, like if you were given $1 million grant, what's the next questions that you would ask in your
Mm-hmm,
research project? And if I
mm-hmm,
weren't involved in my research project and didn't know what we were currently studying, what we were doing, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. So you need
mm-hmm,
to be able to understand what your role in the project is and what the project is overall
mm-hmm.
when you apply.
And you said that that was posed of you during your interview. Was that was there a separate medical and PhD portion of your interview, or they combined?
MD PhD interviews are 2 days. So you do one day is the MD interviews, and the second day is the PhD program interviews.
Mm-hmm.
So that was asked of me for the MD PhD side.
Okay. So what's one piece of advice you would give to those interested in an MD PhD program?
Make sure it's what you want to do.
Oh,
It's a huge, huge time commitment. And then it's not even that it's a huge time commitment, it's years of earning potential that you're
oh
missing
yeah.
out on. So my original med school class is in their first year of residency right now.
Right.
I just had a Zoom call with them last night and they are dying in residency, but they're earning 3 times as much as I'm making right now.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so you have to be sure that the future that you want for yourself is of a physician scientist. A
Hmm.
lot of students want to do MD PhD programs because they're funded or partially funded. That is not the reason.
Hmm. Hmm.
There are so many other ways to pay for medical school that doesn't involve 4 to 5 years of grinding nonstop for a PhD.
Yeah.
Just make sure it's what you want before
Hmm.
you decide to apply.
Great. And as a follow-up to that, any tips on how someone can find out if it's what they want?
Beg a professor to let you do a research project with them. At your school, your faculty should have each faculty member should have a page and it describes what their research is, what their research interests are. Um, at my school, the science hall is a circle, then the biology department was on the second floor. I went to every single professor in that circle until one of them said yes.
Mm.
So if research is what you want to do, put yourself out there, get on someone's project and do it. It's the same with shadowing. If you want to make sure you want to be a physician, you shadow a physician. But the way you decide if you want to do research is to do research.
Right, right, right. And I would add to that, go to research conferences because I think that there's.
I did with in my senior year, and it was amazing. Like I
Hmm.
didn't realize like you do all this work, but then the other part of it is to communicate your findings to other scientists. So I went to 2 conferences in undergrad, and they were both awesome experiences. So yep,
Right.
that's another way.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of nerdy people talking about the thing they love most in the world.
Right.
So
Right. 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 Yeah. Who are
I find them
genuinely
fun.
interested.
But yeah, so just before you commit, make sure it's what you want to do.
Hmm. Great. How long is the MD PhD program?
The average is 8 years.
8 years average.
So med school is 4 years. You can finish your PhD in 3. I've seen it, but I've also seen it take 5. So
Yeah.
they want you to finish in 8.
I think for medical anthro, it's quite a bit longer than that.
Mhm.
I think it's like 12.
That's a long
Yeah, so it
time.
really depends on what your PhD is in.
Right. So some schools offer PhDs in social sciences, which I can imagine will probably take longer. But my school is all strictly lab work and bench science. I think the furthest they get away is epidemiology.
Uh-huh.
And that is something that can be done in 4 years because you get
Uh-huh.
credit for things you do in medical school. Like you're constantly moving and getting credit.
Hmm.
So I took all the classes that my PhD only classmates did, but I took them in a different order than they did. So
Uh,
I still had all the coursework. I still met all those requirements. It's just I jumped into doing research full time a little faster, which is why it seems shorter, but um
uh-huh. Interesting.
they want you to finish in
They
8,
want you
especially
to.
if they're funded by the NIH.
Sure, that makes sense. Right. What are some of the careers you can do with an MD PhD?
Whatever you want.
How
I
about you specifically?
so
This is something I don't know about you. Do you
yeah,
want to do clinical practice, clinical research?
I want to be a surgeon scientist. So I'd like to ideally do 50-50 surgery. I would like to be a plastic surgeon. Just
Mm-hmm.
we got to get there first.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm getting my PhD in microbiology, so I'd like to study bugs that cause disease that require surgical intervention. If you think of flesh-eating bacteria, necrotitis fasciitis,
Uh-huh.
or patients that are at their most critical state that are prone to infection, so post-surgical burns, trauma, and preventing those patients from becoming infected.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I want to do. We have a physician scientist seminar at my school every month where they bring in an MD PhD and they just walk
Oh,
us through This is how I got to where I am right now. This is where I went to school. Some of them did combined programs. Some of them got their PhD and then got their MD. Or, however, no, not one person is the same. None of them are doing the same thing. So it's honestly, where do you see yourself fitting as a physician scientist? Do you see yourself working in industry and coming up with patents and developing new equipment, or do you see yourself working in a clinic and then deriving your scientific questions from the patients that you see? Do you see yourself working as a scientist full time? The NIH employs MD, PhDs all the time because
Right.
they have that medical knowledge and they know how to apply their research to a patient and what that would look like in a patient. The NIH scoops up MD, PhDs. It's honestly what you want to do. I personally am leaning towards private practice, so that I can have my own lab and practice medicine with the patients that I would like to serve. But I've also thought about academic medicine, which is a good fit for MD, PhDs, because you can have that backing of an institution where you can have that protected time to do research and still practice and see patients. So I'm 50-50 right now on which way I want to go. I'm not quite sure but I'm sure I'll figure it out by the time. I have plenty of time.
Right.
I have plenty of time to think about it.
Right,
But honestly, you can do whatever you want with an MD, PhD.
As a non-traditional student, would doing a master's program that involves research be sufficient enough to qualify for the MD, PhD? I'm guessing in addition to whatever in addition to the medical school requirements.
Some students do get a master's. Some students take time off and do research in between. I was fortunate that I didn't have to do that. I've been able to go straight through. But I mean, I don't see why it would hurt unless you already have enough research experience to apply. So that's something that you'll have to think about if you've already been doing research and you feel as though you've been in that project for a long time and can speak about it and share your enthusiasm for science through that project, then that's fine. But if you feel as though you don't have enough research experience, some students go and work in a lab. Some do prep programs, which are for minority students that they put you in a research lab, they give you a stipend, and they help you actually apply to PhD or MD, PhD programs. Some students do postbacks. And some get masters. When I interviewed the person that got accepted with me at that interview, he was a master's student at UMBC, and he got a master's and he started working in a lab on campus. So I remember him because we interviewed together. But I mean, it's honestly just about having that longevity of experience. But a master's is not a bad idea unless it's taking time away from you actually applying.
Right. That's what I was wondering. Depends on how long the master's takes. A lot of students do postbacks, I think. For that. Where did you find the motivation, especially on the tough days?
So that's the thing. Motivation is temporary. Motivation is not a constant fountain that you can pull from and draw from.
Right.
And when that well is empty, discipline takes over.
Yeah.
So you can't rely on motivation. It's not always going to be there, especially on a journey like this where it's years and years and years of work. There are plenty of days I just would much rather stay in my bed and hang out with my family. But like I said, the PhD doesn't earn itself. The MD doesn't earn itself. And that's where the discipline kicks in to say, I set this goal. And the way that I get to this goal is taking incremental steps every day. Sometimes I walk backwards, but that's okay. I took some steps and make incremental steps towards that goal. And motivation is not always going to be there to do it. I can assure you, motivation is not always going to be there. But you just have to have that discipline built in.
That's a great answer. Yeah, I always say you can't think yourself into action. It's just, I've tried most of my training. I tried that. You have to act your way, and you just
have to get up and do it.
Steps. Yeah.
You just have to get up and do it, because there are plenty of mornings I was just like, I want to stay in my bed. But I know if my infection is only supposed to last for 36 hours and it ends at this time, that means I need to go in and stop the infection. Whether I want to do it or not, whether I'm motivated to do it or not, it still needs to get done.
Right. Great.
Same with studying, same with anything. You just, it has to get done. Especially in med school, you just get ran over.
You can't procrastinate in med school.
You cannot. You
But,
cannot. Because the
and I
next
tell
lecture is
people,
coming.
I learned how to procrastinate in my PhD program because it's like lends itself to that. That's another reason
Exactly.
I think.
Exactly, because there's no one telling you, hey, you should go in today. You should
Yeah,
get this done today. But med school, that next lecture is coming. So
right,
if you don't study today, there's just going to be more to study tomorrow and then more to study the next day.
right.
You will get ran over and you cannot rely on motivation for that. That's just, look, I got to get through these I got to get through these slides because tomorrow is another day.
You just knock down the targets, yeah.
Exactly.
Will you have a difficult time getting matched to a residency program after such a long time in research?
No, because the way the program is set up is that I do my third and fourth year of medical school last.
Hmm.
So the most recent thing is what's preparing me for residency. And it's not you do 4 years of medical school, then 4 years of PhD. No, medicine is split in half. So I've done 2 years of medical school and I'm in my third year of my PhD program, and then I will go back and finish. So I'll be at the same point as everyone else that's applying to residency, except I'll have a PhD under my belt
Yeah,
and
yeah,
years of building relationships with
yeah.
physicians that they may not have had.
Right. So you'll have an advantage probably.
Little advantage.
I think one of the most common categories of questions I get is sort of like this. A lot of students say, I know the material, but I can't apply it to passages. I know
See,
I know this information.
that's the difference between knowing and recalling is what
Mm,
I try to
okay.
explain to people. There's is one thing to know, is one thing to understand, but if you can't pull that information out of your brain when the question is asked, you
Hmm.
haven't studied it enough. So when
Hmm.
I used to tutor in undergrad, and they would I read this whole chapter, I highlighted everything. I say, okay, walk me through glycolysis.
Hmm.
And they would say a couple things, and they would open their book and peek, and yeah, and then this happens, and they get a few more steps, and they would peek at their notes again. And I say, all those times you peeked at your notes is a time that you reached into your brain and you did not pull the answer. So that's an answer on a question that you got wrong.
Hmm.
That means you don't know it. So if
Hmm.
you have to constantly refer back to your notes, that means you need to go back over that material because you don't know it.
Hmm.
So if that's the constant problem that they're having, that's a recall. That's flashcards. That's practice questions. And
Right.
so you practice recalling the information, that you're not just trying to stuff the information in your brain. It does no good if you can't pull it back out.
What would you say your breakdown was between reviewing content and answering practice questions and practice tests?
So um, I didn't do a lot of questions because there weren't a lot of questions
Sure.
to be asked. I did go through like the big biology and chemistry concepts. I had to go back to OChem 1 because that's more so covered than 2.
Hmm.
And I had just finished OChem 2 when I took the MCAT.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I had to go back over OChem 1. I had to go through, I literally Googled Sociology 101
Hmm.
and made flashcards of all the major sociology concepts because that was something that I hadn't taken a sociology class, so that's something I had to teach myself. And then I also Googled Psychology 101 and looked at all the major things that you would cover in a basic psychology class because those were things that were added to the MCAT
Right.
the year that I took it. And that served me well, actually. I think that that was really helpful because there just was not any kind of prep anything out there
Yeah.
the year that I took it.
Yeah.
Um, so I did a lot more recall practice than um, there were no test questions. There just wasn't.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
I
So a
think I
lot of
walked around with flashcards like this.
I really want to thank you, Adrian, for devoting this time out of your extraordinarily busy schedule to talk with everybody. I really enjoyed this discussion.
Everyone's upset because I haven't cooked dinner yet.
Oh, no. Well, it's
But
winding down.
I love mentoring, helping, and sharing. So I have no problems answering questions and doing things like this simply because there's really no information out there about how to navigate this as a non-traditional student. So I thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to share with
Absolutely.
your followers